In 2013, a woman in Texas was sentenced to life in prison for a murder with no body, no weapon, and no witnesses. The jury made their decision in under 2 hours, and the judge barely looked up as he read the verdict. But what if they had just convicted an innocent woman? What if the real story was something far more sinister? Jaylen Carter knew the moment he walked into that courtroom that the judge had already decided his fate. 19 years old, standing tall in a suit that fit just a little too big, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew he didn't belong in that defendant's chair. The gavel slammed. Judge Richard Grayson smirked from his bench. Well, another young man who thinks he's smarter than the law, he said, voice dripping with condescension. The gallery chuckled. Jaylen didn't react. He just adjusted his tie and waited. The prosecutor wasted no time painting Jaylen as a reckless criminal. Grand theft auto, resisting arrest, fleeing the scene. He was caught red-handed, the prosecutor declared. Witnesses saw him speeding through the neighborhood in the stolen car. When police arrived, he ran. This is a classic case of a suspect getting caught and trying to lie his way out of it. The judge barely glanced at Jaylen. Do you have anything to say for yourself? He asked, amused. Jaylen nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to represent myself. The courtroom fell silent. Then, laughter. Someone in the back actually scoffed. Judge Grayson shook his head. Son, this isn't a classroom debate. This is a real court, and you're facing real consequences. I suggest you listen to your attorney. Jaylen didn't blink. With all due respect, Your Honor, I've studied law for years. I know my rights, and I have evidence that will clear my name. The judge leaned forward. Oh, this should be good, he muttered. Jaylen stood and walked slowly to the prosecution's table. The state claims I was caught red-handed. That's interesting, he said. Jaylen stood and walked slowly to the prosecution's table. The state claims I was caught red-handed. That's interesting, he said, voice steady. Because there are no fingerprints in the car that match mine. No DNA. No surveillance footage of me getting into the vehicle. Just a witness statement that describes a young black male running. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Judge Grayson's smirk faded just a little. The prosecutor flipped through his papers. The officer identified you at the scene, he argued. Jaylen shook his head. That's not what the body cam footage says. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a USB drive, and slid it across the table. This is the full, unedited body cam footage from the arresting officer. If the court allows it, I'd like to play it now. Judge Grayson hesitated, but nodded. The screen flickered to life. The audio was grainy, but the words were clear. Suspect is fleeing. Young black male, gray hoodie, wait. He just turned the corner. Lost visual. There was a pause. Then, the next words changed everything. Suspect just entered the vehicle. Wait. No, scratch that. That's not him. Wrong guy. We got the wrong guy. The courtroom erupted. Gasp. Whispers. The judge's face drained of color. The prosecutor paled. Jaylen folded his arms. So tell me, Your Honor, if the police report claims they arrested me in the stolen car, but the officer's own words prove they never actually saw me in it, then why am I here? Judge Grayson gripped his gavel. He was losing control. His voice was tight. Counselor Marshall, do you have an explanation? The prosecutor stumbled over his words. Your Honor, this evidence wasn't available to us. Jaylen smiled, just a little. No, it wasn't, because you never asked for it. The tension in the room was suffocating. The judge's fingers twitched over the gavel. Then slowly he let out a breath. Case dismissed. The words rang out like a gunshot. The courtroom exploded. The bailiff called for order, but the noise wouldn't stop. Jaylen exhaled, picked up his briefcase, and turned toward the exit. Just as he reached the doors, the judge spoke again. Carter. Jaylen paused. He didn't turn. Judge Grayson cleared his throat. His voice was quieter this time. I misjudged you. A beat of silence. Then Jaylen finally turned, locking eyes with the man who had mocked him just moments ago. He smiled. Yes, Your Honor, you did. And with that, he walked out. The doors swung shut behind him. The judge exhaled, rubbing his temples. Then his clerk rushed up, a file in hand. Your Honor, you might want to see this. The judge frowned, took the folder, and skimmed the first few lines. His breath hitched. His hands started to shake. The name on the page, Jaylen Carter, Harvard Law School class of 2028. Future Supreme Court nominee. His heart pounded in his chest. He had just belittled a man who, in a few years, could very well sit on the highest court in the country. The gavel suddenly felt heavier in his hand. He swallowed hard. This was one case he would never forget. Judge Richard Grayson sat frozen at his bench, the courtroom now eerily quiet as the crowd filtered out. The file in his trembling hands felt heavier than anything he had ever held. Jaylen Carter, Harvard Law School class of 2028. Future Supreme Court nominee. He read the words over and over, his mind racing. The young man he had ridiculed, dismissed, and nearly sent to prison wasn't just another defendant. He was someone who would one day hold more power than Grayson ever could. A slow, sinking realization settled in his chest. He had almost destroyed the future of a man who could change the very system he swore to uphold. A voice pulled him back. "Your Honor." His clerk, still standing beside him, hesitated before asking, "Should I file the dismissal paperwork?" Judge Grayson swallowed hard. "Yes," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Yes, do it." As the clerk walked away, the judge let out a slow breath. He had ruled on hundreds of cases, seen thousands of faces, but Jaylen Carter's unwavering stare would haunt him. He knew deep down that if Jaylen hadn't been prepared, if he had been just a little less knowledgeable, a little less composed, a little less relentless, he would be sitting in a prison cell right now for a crime he didn't commit. But something still didn't sit right. Grayson turned back to the file, flipping through pages of background information. No criminal record, stellar academic history, mock trial champion, letters of recommendation from Ivy League professors. This wasn't the profile of a car thief. It was the profile of a man built for the legal world. But one note caught his eye, written in red ink at the bottom of the page. Subject flagged for further review. Involvement in previous case pending investigation. His stomach twisted. Another case? He pressed the intercom button on his desk. "Get me everything we have on Jaylen Carter now." Meanwhile, Jaylen stepped out of the courthouse and into the fresh afternoon air. The tension in his shoulders finally eased, but only slightly. He should have felt victorious, but there was no time to celebrate. He knew what came next. As he made his way down the steps, he spotted a familiar face waiting for him at the bottom. Denise Carter, his mother. She stood with her arms crossed, her sharp eyes scanning him up and down as if to check for battle wounds. "Boy," she said, shaking her head, "you scared me half to death." Jaylen chuckled, scratching the back of his head. "Had to take a risk, Ma." She sighed, then pulled him into a tight hug. The cameras around them flashed, reporters shouting his name. But all that mattered in that moment was her grip, strong and steady, like an anchor in a storm. "You're your father's son, that's for sure," she murmured, just loud enough for him to hear. At the mention of his father, Jaylen stiffened. His father, the reason he had stepped into that courtroom so prepared, the reason he had chosen this path. He pulled back, clearing his throat. "Let's get out of here. Too many cameras." Denise nodded, wrapping an arm around his shoulder as they walked to the car. But just as they reached the door, a voice called out behind them, "Mr. Carter." Jaylen turned to see a man in a navy suit, standing a few feet away. Something about him felt off, the way he stood, too stiff, too formal. He wasn't press. He was law enforcement. Jaylen exchanged a glance with his mother, then took a step forward. "Can I help you?" The man gave a tight smile, reaching into his pocket and flashing a badge. "FBI, I need you to come with me. It's about your father." Jaylen's heart stopped. His mother gasped. "What do you mean?" Jaylen asked, his voice sharp. "My father has been dead for 10 years. The agent shook his head. "No, son. He's alive, and we need to talk."